Stephen breaks his tender. Stephen the rocket engine had been working hard all day, and he was beginning to feel tired out. What a day, thought Stephen. I know, said his driver. Stephen, he said, maybe we can have some easy work for tomorrow. Maybe, said Stephen, and Stephen puffed slowly away, tender first. But Stephen, however, didn't know that the turntable wasn't ready for Stephen yet. So Stephen's driver looked behind. Stephen, look out, he said, but Stephen didn't stop. Then there was trouble. Stephen shunted his tender into the turntable well, and it was destroyed. Oh no, said Stephen. It's destroyed. What is? asked Duck. Your tender? Yes, said Stephen. I am so upset now. But then Ferdinand and Sir Handel all laughed at Stephen, but Duck was very cross. Stop it, you two, he said. Later, Stephen's tender was removed, and Stephen, blushing with embarrassment, had to take a nap at the shed without his tender. This isn't fair, he thought. Duck felt sorry for Stephen, but Ferdinand and Sir Handel still thought it was funny, and so Stephen went to sleep in the sheds without his tender that evening. Later that day, Duck took Stephen to the workshop. Stephen was going to get a new tender, but when they arrived at the workshop, Stephen had already saw a familiar tender. Stephen soon began to change his look. But this doesn't look like my real tender, he said. Trust me, said Duck. Ferdinand and Sir Handel won't make fun of you anymore. All right then, said Stephen, and Stephen knew Duck was right. And then, however, Stephen wanted his old tender back, but he knows that his tender was his old tender was at the works at the moment. And so Stephen was coupled to the new tender, and he hurried along his way. And Duck was ready to go. Just then, Duck and Stephen were on their way to do work, but Stephen was still worried that the other engines would make fun of him having a new tender. But Duck was still wrong to think that the others won't make fun of him at all. When they got to the bridge, they saw Neville, Molly and Hank waiting for them. And when Duck and Stephen went past by them, the three engines began to laugh. They all thought it was funny. Oh look, said Molly, is this a new engine or what? I think it is, said Neville, and the three engines both laughed. Duck was very cross, and Stephen felt very worse. You three wouldn't be laughing if we said things like that to you three, but Hank, Molly and Neville were still laughing. They all thought it was funny. Stephen felt very worse, and he puffed away sadly. Stephen, come back, said Duck. Look what you three have done, he said. It wasn't his fault that his tender's lost. Stop making fun of him. And Duck puffed crossly away to find Stephen. And then Duck looked and searched hard enough to find Stephen, but still Stephen was nowhere to be seen. He went through the station and then he saw Stephen under a tunnel. "Stephen, come out," he said. "I know I was wrong, but don't talk to me," shouted Stephen. You made everything worse," he said. "At this rate, I'll look like an embarrassment forever now," he said. "Listen," said Duck. I'm sorry that I was wrong," he said. "But Stephen," said Duck, "if you want to, you can get mad at them." Stephen smiled and came out of the tunnel. "Thank you, Duck," he said. Now let's go back and rewind." "Sure," said Duck, and with that, the two friends puffed back to the bridge to pay Hank, Molly, and Neville out. When the two engines got to the bridge once again, they found Neville, Molly, and Hank, but this time the two engines have already found Sir Handel and Ferdinand getting involved with the three big engines. "Hey, Mr. New Engine," said Hank, "don't you look stupid with your new tender?" This time Stephen was very annoyed. "Will you stop making fun of me?" he said. "I've had enough, so stay away from me," said Stephen. "I am Stephen, but I'm not a new engine anymore," he said. "It's not my fault that my tender's destroyed." "Yeah," said Duck. You said it, Stephen, and you five both need to stop." But they were still laughing. Stephen, this time, had a very big plan. I'll push you off the rails, Ferdinand, if you're not careful with laughing at my new look," said Stephen. Ferdinand was scared, but this made the four engines very cross with Duck and Stephen. "You two are going to pay for this," said Sir Handel. "Let's make a run for it, Stephen," said Duck, and with that, Duck and Stephen ran away from Ferdinand, Sir Handel, Hank, Molly, and Neville. They will be in big trouble soon. A few days later, the Fat Controller had punished Molly, Hank, and Sir Handel for being mean to Stephen, and so he made them shun trucks and coaches. And as for Ferdinand and Neville, they were punished too for being mean to Stephen, and so he took them in the shed. And so he took them in the sheds for being silly. And with that, Stephen had finally got his old tender back, and Duck had been very good friends with Stephen by sticking by him whoever's engines are being mean to one another.